Hello, and thank you for joining us for the third of our webinar series focusing on tough conversations that we know are critical for culture changes on campuses to help reduce equity gaps in student success. We all know that higher education institutions in the US must be planning now for the shifting numbers and demographics of our high school graduates across the country. Our series is designed to let you hear the strategies and challenges that the featured campuses are using to create and to sustain their cultures that result in better success for all their students. There we go. I'm Sally Johnstone, Executive Director of the Foundation for Student Success, and joining me on this webinar today will be Ed Bonahue from Santa Fe College in Florida, Tricia Johnson from the Community College of Aurora in Colorado, Letitia Wall from Winston-Salem State University in North Carolina, and Ken Marquez from Adams State University located in Colorado. Let me explain our format today. Each of our panelists will briefly tell their campus's story regarding the importance of leadership in guiding campus culture change, but also what happens when leadership changes. After all have spoken, we'll move into discussions for the second half of our time together. I'm also joined today by two of my colleagues here at the Foundation for Student Success, Stacy Ziss, who will monitor the questions you want to ask the panelists, and Sarah Torres-Lugo, who will be running the webinar. Okay, to pose a question or comment, click on the Q&A in your screen controls. If you're in the full screen mode, you might have to hover your mouse over your screen to make the controls visible. But once you click the Q&A, a window will appear. Type your question in the text field and then click Send to submit it. If you do want to pose a question to a specific panelist, please make sure to begin your question with the name of that panelist or the institution. The chat function will not be monitored, so please use the Q&A feature. Now, the goal of the Foundation for Student Success is to increase the success of Black, Latino, and American Indian students using data-affirmed practices. And to get a sense of our history, please go to the FSS website, and you can see that on the screen right now in the lower right-hand corner. We switch the slide there. Great. FSS is working with 7 mentor campuses and 21 mentee campuses across the country to help change campus cultures to reduce equity gaps and increase success for all students. The map you see on the screen indicates which states have campuses now working with FSS. The darker states have mentor institutions, and the lighter colored ones have mentee institutions. For the last year, these 28 public colleges and universities have worked together in pods of 4 institutions each, learning from one another. Now, changing the culture of a campus is a strange and wondrous process, and it does take years to accomplish. And as you know, there's no simple way to shift a culture. Our mentee and mentor institutions are exploring all the ways to make that happen. And as I mentioned, the lessons and strategies these campuses used and are using serve as the basis of this and the upcoming webinars. On the FSS website, there are case studies, progress reports, and other resources that you can take a look at. Now, as I mentioned before, and I think all of us are aware, it is critical that we help all students that come to our campuses be successful. And there is an urgency to get this marathon started. And our panelists are going to share parts of how they did it. Our focus at FSS is on campus culture change. And we know that that is a long process, 8 to 10 years, but we also know that stable leadership is critical to get the process started. And there's a lot of research on leadership and a lot of very good work on leadership for inclusivity. But in this webcast, we're focusing on leadership issues from a campus perspective. What happens when leaders leave? How does a campus keep the momentum going? How can the leaders assure their boards are really engaged to make the process of change more permanent? Let me turn now to our panelists for answers to some of these questions. And we're going to start with Ed Bonahue from Santa Fe College. Ed?
Thanks very much, Sally. It's great to be with you all today and to represent Santa Fe College. We are Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida. We're co-located here with the University of Florida here in Gainesville, and we are a community college, one of 28 community colleges in the Florida college system. But like virtually all of those colleges, we here at Santa Fe offer a limited number of bachelor's degrees. I'm pleased to tell our story today and tell you a little bit more about Santa Fe. We have a lot of transfer students. About 2/3 of our enrollment, as you can see, is oriented toward transfer to the state university system. About 30% is oriented toward workforce certificates and professional degrees, and only about 5% of our college is oriented toward the baccalaureate programs. We're a mid-sized community college by Florida standards, and that's about 12,000 FTE. We're very lucky to have a long-serving president. Jackson Sasser has been our president since 2002. He has previously served on the board of the American Association of Community Colleges, as well as ACE and the League for Innovation. And under his tenure, we've had a very successful, over a decade, almost 2 decades now, of service to our community. We've been twice recognized by the Aspen Institute for best practices in community college education, including winning the 2015 Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. So because of those outstanding outcomes, especially in the area of student completion, we're pleased that we can share with you that certainly we don't do everything perfectly. We have a lot of gaps, and I'm here to share some of that story with you today. If I could have the next slide, please. We're lucky to have very high completion rates for many of our students. That's the red dotted line there in the middle. And we've been very successful in serving our Hispanic students. We've been less successful in serving and supporting our African American students, and this has been a persistent performance gap, as you can see, over many years. And so the story we have to tell about engaging leadership has to do with moving the ball down the field in the area of equitable outcomes and engaging leadership in a conversation about equity. In this case, next slide, please. In this case, it's a matter of how the president and the college engaged our board of trustees about this performance gap. So despite a very real success in terms of our college performance, really superlative outcomes in terms of retention and completion. When we disaggregated the data and just for a routine compliance report or a routine equity report, we began to see that there was an important performance gap that was persistent and lasted for many years. And so faced with this, the president was not satisfied with it and said we really need to take steps to provide greater service and support for this underserved part of our student community. We had done all kinds of outreach and service partnerships with the community. We were really successful in the mission of access. Where we were less successful was in the mission of completion. And so we really needed to tell that story to the board. The board was very happy that we were winning prizes, winning awards, and yet here was the college saying we're really only serving a part of the students who are coming our way. Next slide, please. The there we go. We needed to tell the story to a board of trustees in a way that would really compel folks to pay attention and to carry out a mission of change with urgency. The president wanted to establish a program called My Brother's Keeper that would be dedicated to simply serving Black men, African American men. It would be a recruitment, retention, and mentoring program specifically for this one population. There were hard questions asked about equality. Gee, should we do, if we're going to have a program of recruitment and retention and mentoring and specialized advising, shouldn't we do that for all students? So we had difficult conversations about the difference between equality and equity, and the idea that equity means equitable outcomes and trying to support people with what they need. Those were hard questions to have with the board because this was a new conversation. The president engaged the board by sharing data about the performance gap, and also by making it real by relating the experiences of individual students and what had happened to those students, what their experience of the college had been. His intention was to allocate recurring resources for this project, not to establish a pilot program, not to just try something experimental, but to establish this as a permanent program that would make a difference over time. And it was really that combination of both data that communicated the weightiness of the challenge, and also kind of the human side of it. That was what resulted in the support of the board for this initiative, and for the board to really get behind the other kinds of questions of equity. Next slide, please. We learned a lot over the years from the conversation that we've been having about equality and equity. I would share with anyone listening that depending upon where you are in your college or university, you start by using what you have. If you're trying to generate or sustain a conversation about equity, then start with what you have. In our case, it was a report. It was a report that could have been taken simply as a compliance requirement, but it was made into something that was a lot more. It became something related to our mission of community development, our mission of equitable outcomes. And so at other colleges or universities, it might be different. It may have to do with community service. It may be a student group. It may be some other topic. But start with wherever you are, but you have to get started. And then the other point here is the average data probably won't be very revealing about what's happening to different groups of students. So you have to have the resources and courage to disaggregate the data to look at the experience of different groups of students. I think every college is challenged by whether we should just go in completely into a full-scale implementation of a new idea, or should we just try it out and do a pilot project? And I want to encourage everyone, you have to get past the pilot project at some point if you really want to make an impact. And also you have to get past politics. We're in a state here in Florida, which is very divided politically. And so the president had to find language that was really about economic development and community development. It was not about politics, in a way that everybody could get behind. The place where we all want to end up, of course, is in a conversation about completion and about equitable completion, so that the students who are walking in the door in August look very much like the students who are walking across the stage at graduation, and that you're not losing a lot of students halfway through. So that's a little bit about our story here at Santa Fe, and I'll look forward to sharing more later on. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ed. And for those of you in the audience, be sure to post any questions you have for Ed during our discussion section. And remember, do that in the Q&A section. Let's move on to Tricia Johnson and the story from Aurora Community College.
Thank you, Sally. I am honored to join you today to talk about the Community College of Aurora's vision to be the college where every student succeeds. As Sally mentioned, my name is Tricia Johnson, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I have the privilege to serve as Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Community College of Aurora. Next slide, please. The Community College of Aurora is located in Aurora, Colorado. Aurora is Colorado's third largest city with just over 360,000 residents and is exceptionally diverse. In Aurora, almost 54% of residents are people of color. Aurora also has a large immigrant and refugee population. Almost 20% of Aurora residents are born outside the United States. Also, around 30% of the Aurora population speaks a language other than English in the home. As for CCA, we have enrollment of close to 12,000, and over 60% of our students are students of color. And CCA was designated as a Hispanic serving institution in 2016. Now, with respect to our diverse community, we have committed to inclusive excellence at all levels of the institution. We embrace inclusive excellence because we want our students, staff, and faculty to learn in and contribute to an inclusive environment. Our message to our students is, you matter, you are valued, you belong. With that being said, it does not mean that it has come easily or that we won't continue to face challenges. Over the past couple of years, we've experienced turnover in the Vice President for Academic Affairs position, the Vice President for Student Affairs position, and the Vice President for Administrative Services position. What was critical for CCA and what I'll discuss today is how we as an institution kept the momentum of our inclusive excellence work even in the midst of a good deal of transition and when we experienced pushback. Key to our work is intentional distributed leadership, empowering leaders across the college to be the voice and push for progress when it comes to equity for students. Next slide, please. In aligning with the statewide Colorado Rises Master Plan, CCA is committed to erasing the equity gap. Because of this, not only is this a focus for our institution, but also for our state. And grounding the work in the statewide approach has been instrumental for buy-in. As a college, we are focusing on retention and graduation in equitable numbers. So through our inclusive excellence efforts, we are proud that we're starting to see a reduction in that gap. Needless to say, we still have work to do to improve retention numbers overall. And what I'll describe today is an effort to both erase the equity gaps in student outcomes and improve retention, graduation, and transfer for students. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, CCA has experienced substantial change in the cabinet level leadership over the past 2 years. During this time frame, fortunately, our college president has been consistent and has truly been a strong and vocal leader in our inclusive excellence efforts. I cannot reinforce enough the criticality of commitment from the college executive. This is hard work, and we will face challenges in implementation. So having the college president and senior leaders holding strong is key in the progress that we've been able to make at the college. As transition occurred in key positions, we began experiencing some pushback to the initiative. Like many other colleges in the midst of the equity work, we needed to address misperceptions about the work and resistance that inevitably arises. We needed to address a belief that commitment to equity meant a reduction in rigor. Similarly, we needed to address our many institutional initiatives that were perceived as disjointed. Senior leadership realized that tying our daily work back to a clearly defined strategic plan was essential, and inclusive excellence was how we would achieve that. Therefore, in the Academic Affairs Division, my leadership team and I approached the work in the following way. We approached it through backward design by looking at what we were trying to achieve. First, we focused on serving our diverse community and on creating educational spaces that reflect our students, their lived experiences, and the contributions and value that they bring to our learning environment. It's important to note that, again, this takes work. Academic leaders have to be prepared to dedicate time and dollars to build this capacity. With the foundation in place, we align the work with our institutional strategic priorities. We asked ourselves, how does what we do in our classrooms and instructional supports advance what we're trying to achieve as a college? Finally, it has been essential that college leaders employed consistency of messaging and communication and ensuring a level of transparency about how and why we're making the decisions and taking the actions, always focusing on our ability to best serve our students. In order to tie inclusive excellence into how we achieve our mission, our vision, our strategic goals, for our college, we knew we needed to empower leaders at all levels to be the champions of the work. In our institutional culture, a top-down approach to equity would not work, and it would certainly not be sustainable in the event of further transition. Next slide, please. Ultimately, this is about campus culture change. And the way we've done this is by leveraging leaders across the college, teacher leaders, department chairs, director-level staff, and then built-in accountability measures. In the past 18 months, we've worked to shift the mindset from inclusive excellence being one more thing to it being how we do our work, that inclusive excellence is not an add-on. Here is where cabinet-level leadership is key. In the times of competing priorities, there is always something else needing to be done. For academic affairs, each school and department was asked to analyze the inclusive excellence strategic plan and then identify strategies of their functional areas and employees within those areas were implementing. Next slide, please. So some of the strategies that we employ to help make this shift are for our instructional deans and the VP's office, constant and consistent messaging regarding equity as a lens and the connection with our institutional vision. This was also a way to reinforce that our approach was here for good. It wasn't going to change in a transition. As we worked with department chairs, we were able to reiterate the role of equity in terms of goal development, departmental planning, professional development, and instructional coaching. Similarly, we wanted to elevate our teacher leaders. One way we've done this is through a required inclusive pedagogy workshop series 4 times a year for all faculty. This initiative is organized by a group of faculty, department chairs, deans, and the VP, and we take a shared governance approach here. We've also expanded the work of the Equity Scorecard to launch our Equity and Instruction Leadership Academy, or ELA, led by teacher leaders. Now, ELA is a cohort-based program focusing on analyzing equity gaps at the individual level. Faculty analyze their instructional practices and reflect on what they have learned. They try new strategies out in the classroom and interact with a faculty mentor on progress and learning. And then further at the cabinet level, we have focused on the criticality of diversifying our faculty and staff. We are listening to our students, their desire to see their identities reflected in our faculty and staff. And then the senior leaders of the institution have agreed that this is a priority. So we are allocating budget to ensuring we get word out in the appropriate networks, and we ensure that we have diverse pools for all vacant positions. In practice, we have required that job descriptions be reworked, moving beyond simply embedding an inclusive excellence statement and toward threading inclusive excellence concepts throughout the listing, from position description to job duties to required competencies. And our most recent strategy is building equity measures into all assessments. So we're moving from assessment as a compliance activity, like Ed mentioned, to assessing to keep track of growth and to see how effectively we're engaging learners in equitable ways in our classrooms through program review. Finally, likely the most important strategy for college leadership has been staying the course when faced with resistance. Again, this is hard work. We continue to work to create spaces of honesty and transparency to discuss the challenges that faculty and staff experience as we reflect on our practice. And we realize that our work is not done. It will never be done. However, our focus is on building a critical mass of educators and leaders at every level who put our vision of every student succeeding first and foremost. Thank you, and back to you, Sally.
Thank you, Tricia. Some very interesting insights, and I do want to mention that we're going to get into even more details in our next webinar in October, looking at different kinds of hiring practices. So thank you for kind of setting that up for us. I would remind members of the audience to please go ahead and post any questions you may have for Tricia, or any discussion items that her remarks have really stimulated. Now we're going to move to North Carolina and hear from Letitia Wall from Winston-Salem State University.
Thank you, Sally. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic and share how Winston-Salem State University has used the strategic plan to get and keep all of our campus leaders on board with our equity and student success priorities. Because we know that continuity on a college campus can definitely be a winding road, but I'd like to focus on how a strategic plan provides that continuity in the midst of change. Next slide, please. I would like to start by talking about Winston-Salem State University a little bit. We are a historically Black college university founded in 1892, and we are also a member of the University of North Carolina system, which has 16 campuses across the state. I have included a few highlights and accolades that we have been fortunate to achieve over the past years, and these are reflective of our work and staying on our strategic plan. But demographically, we are 71.6% women and 28.4% male. We have 73% of our students are African American, 15% white, 4% Hispanic or Latino, and 63% of our students are Pell eligible. Next slide, please. We have been fortunate to enjoy some key success markers over the past 8 or 9 years or so, and we believe that has what's given us the opportunity to participate as a mentor institution with the Foundation for Student Success. And we have continued to focus and work on ways we can improve our graduation rates and persistence rates, because we know that the students who not only come here, we want them to stay and graduate. So I included this information here for the review of the audience, some of the metrics and markers we have achieved since 2010. But, you know, in the midst of these successes, we were experiencing major changes in our top leadership on our campus. Thank you. So if you notice on this slide, we talk about some of the top cabinet level changes we've had from between 2007 until the present. So we had our chancellor, one retire, one come in January 2015. We had our provost, who was here from 2009 to 2017, the new provost that started just a matter of months ago. Through structural reorganization, we eliminated a vice chancellor. We have a new CFO that came in January, and a new vice chancellor for advancement, our fundraising unit, to come in July. So it really gives a snapshot on the huge amount of changes that we were involved in. But you know, the question becomes, well, how do we stay true to our direction? And the answer to that is the strategic plan. Next slide, please. So since 2010, we've had 2 strategic plans. We had a strategic plan that was 2010 through 2015, and we are currently in our strategic plan 2016 through 2021. And the interesting thing about our strategic plans is they are a campus-wide engaged opportunity and exercise. And that is important because we have to ensure buy-in not just from a top-down level, but from every level. And having this plan and these plans in place have allowed us to maintain that continuity. Our 2010-2015 plan, you know, had very specific goals focused on academic excellence and student success and community engagement. efficiency and effectiveness of resources, and our campus culture and pride. So everything that we did and that we do is reflective of those strategic goals. And in our new strategic plan, our 2016-21 plan, those goals are complementary from our previous goals, strengthening liberal education, enhancing our academic graduate programs, our commitment to social justice, enhancing and the stewardship and the revenues that we have for our resources, and maintaining the quality of infrastructure. And these goals came from engagement across our entire campus. So, all of our leaders see and understand that everything we do has to be reflections of the strategic plan. And as you see, these two plans are a complemented marriage, and they are really made to build upon the successes we've had. Next slide, please. And of course, the benefit, I would say, of being in a system is that we are also held accountable for a system plan. And so the UNC system launched its plan in January 2017, and it has 5 areas of focus that all the schools in the UNC system are responsible. And that includes areas around access and strategies and goals around student success, affordability and efficiency, economic impact and community engagement, and of course, excellent and diverse institutions. So if nothing else, you hear a theme, and that for Winston-Salem State University is important because it allows us to be able to be consistent and make sure, and at the same time meet the outcomes that are expected of us. So and as you see, the metrics that are aligned with these strategic areas are the responsibility of every campus in this UNC system. And so we are held accountable to make sure we are meeting specified markers in those areas. Next slide, please. So in terms of lessons learned and reflections, it's important to first state that leaders are attracted to Winston-Salem State University because of our successes and growing reputation. And we have been able to stay true to our path, and the strategic plan keeps us true because the only constant is change. We have been an institution for 126 years, and so we know that we will have changes in leadership and ebbs and flows, but the leaders that are attracted to our university are attracted because of what we have put forward and who we are, and they are attracted to us just as we are attracted to them to want to continue to be complementary. We have been successful, so we have been able to be fortunate to attract leaders who want to leverage that success that we've already been able to accomplish to that next level. The other thing is strategic planning. It provides our roadmap. It keeps us honest and true because it allows us to support our yeses, and it allows us to support our nos, and it is very clear on where we want to go. Now, style may vary in how we get there. Some may want to go on a roadmap in a Mini Cooper. Some may want to go on the roadmap in a Ferrari. But the bottom line is we're on the same path. And so the style of that leader may be the differential, but the plan is what keeps us true to our institution. And from a perspective, when a leader is interested in coming to Winston-Salem State at any level, it is important that a leader has to evaluate whether they can execute this plan or if this is the place for them. And that is a personal and professional decision that anyone who is in a role of leadership must decide, that when we have a vision set that is the vision reflecting this university, then a leader has to decide, am I in the place, or do I philosophically buy in and agree so that I can empower and engage and inspire my respective unit to execute this vision. And so we believe here at Winston-Salem State University that this strategic plan, the last one and this one and the next one, will be continuing strategies and roadmaps that we will use to move us forward to the next level. That concludes my section of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Letitia. And I think your notion of what guides you through changing leadership is a very important one, particularly in this arena of equity gap reduction. Please remember to post questions for Letitia if you have any. And our final story today comes from Ken Marquez from Adams State University. Ken?
Thank you, Sally. Sally stated, my name is Ken Marcus, and it's my absolute pleasure to speak with you all today on this topic and share Adams State University's story and some of our lessons learned with you today. It's my honor to serve as the Vice President for Student Services here at my alma mater. Next slide, please. So ASU is a public four-year Hispanic serving institution located in southern Colorado, surrounded by beautiful Sangre de Cristo Mountains and San Juan mountain ranges. We offer a variety of degrees to approximately 1,800 undergraduate students, 1,400 graduate students, and several hundred distance learners. To highlight just a few other items in the slide, our Hispanic enrollment is about 38%. 51% of our students are Pell eligible, 40% are first generation, and as of our this year's census, 48% of our students are minority. So we're very proud of that improvement in our data. Next slide, please. So the last thing I wanted to share with you in respect to our demographics, as I stated, we're an HSI institution and have received over $22 million in federal funds to focus on increasing our Hispanic student persistence rates, engaging faculty and staff in culturally relevant curriculum development, promoting graduate opportunities for Hispanic students, just to name a few of those HSI goals. I don't want to stay on this long, but if anyone's interested in talking more about our HSI status and our goals, please feel free to contact me at a later date. We'll talk more about that. But what I really wanted to do was sort of set the foundation of where Adams State's at and what we're all about, so I can really tell you more about our story. So next slide, please. So this is where it gets kind of ugly. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've learned through multiple leadership changes here at Adams State. In 2016, the Higher Learning Commission placed ASU on a probationary period. Now, the reason stemmed from our distance learning program, and although we felt that those were fairly minor, we were placed on a probationary status. In 2017, ASU was selected for a Title IV funds program review. I will tell you this, if you think your university is doing a good job with Clery compliance, it's most likely not. It probably needs to be more fabulous than just a good job. We learned a lot from that evaluation. But here at ASU, we've also seen about 8 straight years of declining enrollment, which of course has led to financial concerns and several leadership changes. So why share all of this with you? Because although I would never wish all of these events on any institution all at once, like we experienced, these events ultimately played a major role in getting our leadership really engaged in our continued success and achieving our mission, and also staying afloat when you look at the number of leadership changes that I'm going to share with you here in just a minute. It happened to be the real slap in the face sort of moment that opens up your eyes, because a lot of times we just don't realize how much we get entrenched in just the day-to-day stuff that happens, because we all know emergencies happen, and we sometimes lose sight of that overarching mission or goal that we're all here for. So next slide. So since June of 2016, ASU has had 5 different vice presidents in our academic affairs, vice presidents for academic affairs, and 4 different presidents, all within about a 3-year span. Also, in 2011, we eliminated our provost model. We sort of changed it to a vice president of enrollment management position. And then in 2015, we eliminated that vice president for enrollment position completely. In 2017, we eliminated the assistant vice president, for student services, and the assistant vice president for distance education. And in 2018, we eliminated our chief operating officer. As you can see, a lot of those financial concerns, were the reason that we had to make some of these changes. So let me put this all in perspective for you. Our current president today is an interim president, and our board of trustees will have to determine through a number of measures if she'll continue into the next year or if we go out to do a national search to replace her. So last year, our president left in February, and our interim VP for academic affairs was appointed acting president on top of his interim VPAA roles. So I know that sounds really weird, but he had volunteered to be the vice president for academic affairs for 1 year, and in the middle of that process, also stepped into an acting president role. It's crazy, but very true. So next slide, please. So how did we do it all? So we kind of did the old pinky swear model. Now I say that somewhat humorously, but it's really true. Some of us literally did a pinky swear, and we dedicated ourselves to the students and our mission here at Adams State. We swore to stay positive. We dedicated ourselves to making the changes we needed to get off that probationary status, to stay strong until leadership was back in place. The think, do, be positive. Now, when you think do be, I'm not talking about Colorado's marijuana situation. Think, do, be positive. That's something that is above my desk, and I look at that every day so that we can continue to stay positive when we're focused on these leadership changes. Next slide. So how did we do that? So when HLC and the DOA review, we all sat down and we decided we needed to take on specific parts that had to be accomplished. We pulled out our strategic plan. We started reevaluating it. It helped us to determine, the issues. We assigned specific people to focus only on those specific pieces, gave them the support that they needed to make that happen. We involved all constituents across campus to get things done. We went back and looked at our performance indicators to see if we were missing our goals. We pulled the core players who were, people who have been on campus for some time and used their knowledge and history to take some of those leads. And I have to remind you that one of the lessons we learned is that leadership does not only come from the highest paid employees on campus. You remember that adage, it takes a village at times? Well, this played out for us. We all had to step up. We all had to take a piece to keep our campus, to take care of our campus. When we lost a leader, and you saw that we've lost several, we would go back to the drawing board, start a search process, but sometimes it takes the right person to fill in a temporary position, and sometimes it takes a little bit of luck. For example, our second vice president for academic affairs, when we lost our second VP for academic affairs, we wanted to do a national search, but we still needed an interim to fill in. So we had 2 faculty members who volunteered to take on that role for 1 year. The faculty member that we hired had absolutely no desire to fill the position of president or vice president for academic affairs. This turned out for us to be a brilliant move because that interim person had no alternative motives. The decisions that he made would not affect his going back to being a faculty member. And he did exactly what we needed him to do, which was focus solely on keeping us afloat, keeping our goals and mission in line. And he did that. Now, that's a crazy piece in this story, but like I had said earlier, when our last president left in February, that interim VPAA role was appointed to that acting president. And so he took on 2 high leadership roles on our campus, knowing that he was going to be done in June, kept us on track, kept everyone focused, and led us the way that we needed to be. So one of the, things that we learned from this whole experience was It doesn't always take, someone who wants to be a president to fill a president role. I will tell you this, when his terms were, when his terms were over, he went for a very long hike in the mountains. But he did do what we needed him to do, and that was help us get off of the HLC probationary status, and also helped us in identifying the $2.7 million that we needed to make cuts and adjustments were to get us back into a better academic standing. So communication is vital here. And one of the things that we also learned was it's very important to educate new leadership. We took our strategic plan out, our mission, our vision, other university documents, and spent time with our leadership to make sure that they understand where that plan came from. So many times candidates read those documents online before they come to campus, but they don't know what the real history is or what the purpose was when you create those documents. So we felt it was really important to sit down and talk about that and make sure that they understood that history, and we found it to be extremely beneficial. The other piece we really learned was the importance of educating your board of trustees. Is vital. Making sure they know the history of a strategic plan, that they understand the data that's being presented to them in their meetings, and that they're getting the feedback needed to help them make the decisions that are essential to supporting their, the leadership on campus. We determined that due to all of the leadership changes, our board of trustees were just not getting good information. It was changing too much. They really didn't understand everything that was being presented. Some of those members were new, some of those board members were departing, so there were also a lot of leadership changes on our board of trustees that had to be taken into place. So one of the things that we have done as an executive team is we attend our board of trustees annual summer retreat where they are trained and educated on what their purpose is, but also on understanding what the university's role and missions are. So we attend those retreats to make sure that we help educate our board of trustees. The last thing that we felt was key for us was to rebuild trust and confidence on our campus. With all the leadership changes in the last 3 years, the lack of confidence really began to take a toll on our campus. So communication to the campus is extremely vital during these times of these leadership changes, because everyone on campus wants to know what's going on. Why did that person leave? They want to know the facts, but of course, personnel matters are not something you can discuss. But what we decided as a leadership team was everything that we can discuss would be discussed. So we had town hall meetings. We discussed what we could talk about with the changes, why people were leaving. We talked about our plan moving forward. We're very transparent and made sure that our community and our campus community stayed informed of what the changes were going to be. Last slide, please. So we currently, like I said, we currently have this interim president who may be here next year or she may not be. We may go on to search for another full-time president. But in the process of her search, one of the things I think that she said really has stuck with me. And she made that comment that the appointment is interim, but nothing about the work is interim or temporary. So, I leave you with this reminder that don't get lost in the overall day-to-day stuff that happens, because it's extremely easy to do that. Stay very positive and focused on what your strategic plan and your other important documents are telling you. And don't be afraid to educate your leadership, including your board of trustees. Sometimes we think they're going to lead us, but we need to give them the basis to allow them to lead us in the future, knowing what our history is. So I thank you for the time. Back to you, Sally.
Ken, thank you very much for telling what I know was a very difficult story, and yet at the same time, I think very informative. At this point, we're going to move into the discussion section of our webinar, and I want to start with a question for Ed at Santa Fe College. Ed, you've been very lucky at Santa Fe to have some very stable leadership, but I'm sure there are people on the call that have gone through the kinds of things that Ken just described, and there's a real challenge related to the equity goals at the college or university, but they may have difficulty in engaging the new leadership in that. Do you have any suggestions or specific strategies to try if someone is trying to get the attention of their institutional leadership?
Thanks, Sally. Let me offer a few thoughts on that. First of all, as I think you've heard from every panelist, so much of this comes down to institutional mission and to strategy. Letitia talked about the strategic plan as kind of a guidepost for how to keep the institution focused on equity and equitable outcomes. And I think, faced with turnover in leadership, which is really the new normal, it certainly is the new normal for community colleges, and it sounds like for my panelists, it is for a lot of different kinds of institutions. It is the new normal, this kind of leadership turnover. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to work in an institution with a mission that we can get behind, and to talk about that mission, to be sure that equity is part of the strategic planning, part of the values of that mission. And then we all have to find ways to lead from wherever we are. If we have a cabinet post, great. If you're a faculty post, great. But there are ways to create momentum and to build consensus around change, no matter what your job is. If you're trying to engage leadership and sustain momentum for these kinds of projects, I think you should use whatever you have at hand. For us, I mentioned it was a compliance report that we didn't want to just treat as a compliance report, but that we wanted to make into something that really was more compelling. There are sometimes student groups. There are events on campus that allow a conversation to start. And certainly in North Carolina, they're having some really difficult conversations right now relating to history and to the impact of history on equity. If you're trying to engage leadership, I think there are ways to engage leadership in non-threatening ways, but in compelling ways. If most presidents want to have some type of open door policy, and I think that's always great when you can take advantage of that. I think that presidents also want to hear what the students' experience of the college or university is. And so when you create allies among students or student groups or student advisors, there are often opportunities for continuing, for kind of launching the conversation and sustaining the conversation that should be ongoing at the college and not dependent just on leadership, but that informs leadership, even if it's turning over.
Ed, thank you. Some nice insights. Tricia, at the Community College of Aurora, what are some of the challenges that you came into as a new leader that you would have never anticipated?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. That's a great question. I think to an extent, we expect there to be the challenges of identifying implicit bias and understanding what that means as a practitioner, and the challenging conversations that go along with that. Those are things to be expected. But one of the things that was surprising to me and that we've had to really work through is the sense of urgency that our faculty and our teachers and our instructors are feeling with regard to, okay, I've learned this theory, I'm understanding what this means from an inclusive pedagogy perspective, and now I feel like I need to make all of the changes now. And so really supporting our folks to understand that this is a marathon, and it's about that iterative process of teaching and supporting students, and understanding that, when your eyes are opened, it becomes so difficult, but that it's not feasible to do everything at once. And then just helping people work through the concepts of what does privilege mean as I have structured my course that I might have taught for the last 20 years, or as we're looking into our practices and adding in evaluative components to know if we are effective. We want to change everything right away, and to really build sustainable processes, and that is something that surfaced that I really didn't expect.
Thank you. Letitia, you have gone through some very real leadership change at Winston-Salem State, and you've really asked in what you were saying that the leaders adapt or balance their vision to what the university has developed as its strategic plan. And how has that been accomplished?
That's a great question, Sally. I think one of the things that is important to emphasize is that, there are two factors I think that have been critical for our campus. One is to recognize that the strategic plan in and of itself is not the vision of one person. It is a community, it's a campus strategic plan, because we're all held accountable to the outcomes of that plan. We have infused this plan so much in everything that happens on our campus, from our performance evaluations as faculty and staff to, the co-curricular activities we have, to our reward system, to our budgeting system, our budgeting processes, everything is the plan is woven into everything we do. So it is the fabric of who we are. And so I think that has allowed this plan in and of itself to be the driver, and it has allowed our campus to take ownership collectively in the direction that we are going. So I think it has proven to be the foundation of everything that we do, everything that we say we do. Everything is in alignment. So that's what I would say.
So obviously it was clear to new leadership coming in that this is real.
Oh yes, it's real, it's live, it's living, it's growing. It does not just sit on a shelf and collect dust and come out when our accrediting body is on the way.
Ken, let me move to you. You mentioned this in your comments, that it was really worthwhile engaging these new leaders in understanding the kind of realities that Letitia just mentioned in terms of their mission and strategic plans. Can you tell us a little bit more and give us some examples of how you did this sort of onboarding of new leaders?
Yeah, happy to do that, because that was kind of a cool thing that we, that kind of came to us. It's not something you think about, but we started thinking, we have all of this focus on our students in respect to onboarding them, recruiting them, and then how to retain them and keep them focused. Well, we got to thinking, we're going through these leaders nonstop for the last 3 years. I was like, how do we make sure that our leadership is on board, like understanding what and where all this comes from. So, with our current president, we really said, let's sit down and really talk about, what is this strategic plan? Where did it come from? How did we develop it? I mean, I noticed there was another question about, who takes on the role of, your strategic plan and some of those other support strategies. But what we did, which was really cool, was we involved our entire campus. We had these, every time we had an all-campus meeting or a town forum, we focused on our strategic plan and how everyone was involved in making sure that they agreed and they were a part of developing our strategic plan. So what was really cool is to give her that basic understanding that this was a campus-wide initiative. It just wasn't a bunch of leaders sitting in a room coming up with what we think our goals are. It was a campus-wide initiative. So her understanding that we think it has value because now when she goes out and is talking to the constituents out there, she can say, so, you know, what do you believe and how are you a part of? And they can tell her what they think was, you know, a big piece of. So onboarding your leadership made perfect sense to us that they can't just come in and go, okay, you know, they can come in and go, I'm going to do it my way. But it makes a lot of sense to say, here's all this history. Come in and take over and take off from where we left off. You know, we need the leadership, but we also need you to understand where we were before you take us into, you know, some other somewhere else. And it sort of has paid off because some of those, you know, our new leadership, our new vice president for academic affairs, our new president, have both really a better foundation of what our institution is all about and where we have come from, and it sort of makes sense. And then she's also able to better connect and understand some of the pieces of where our board, some of the decisions that our board has had to make, and help us continue with those decisions and make sure that we're moving forward with those decisions. So I think onboarding new leadership, there should be some type of orientation process at every institution that brings, even if it's a president or a new board member, there should be some type of orientation that says, here's our history. It's not, you know, like Leticia was saying, it's not just a document that sits on you know, in a shelf for 5 years, or when our accreditation folks come around. We got to live and breathe this thing every single day, and you have to help us keep that moving forward. So that's our thought, and it really has paid off for us. So it's changed the way we think in regards to when new leadership starts and how we bring them on board.
Ken, thank you. Very insightful again. Stacy, do we have some questions that have come from audience members?
Yes, we do, Sally. I'm going to start with Ed, but the other panelists might want to chime in on this. Could you give an example of how communicating issues surrounding equity gaps while avoiding politics?
Sure. I wondered if that would come up. So here in Florida, we are in a state where, for a variety of reasons, we've had the state government controlled by one party for a long time. And there are other states like that. And so if your state is left-leaning or right-leaning, or if it's really split down the middle, I think one of the things that it's incumbent on many of us to do is find the right language to talk about equity and outcomes that will be compelling to everybody, no matter what's your personal background, no matter, you know, your political inclinations. Within community colleges, you know, nationally we have certainly within our mission, we have community development and economic development and workforce development. And there are ways in which, in some states, including in my state, that's probably the right place to pitch your language. It's interesting for me to talk with colleagues from other states. If I had a colleague from Seattle or from California, they would talk about social justice, and they would talk about they would use some buzzwords that wouldn't quite have the same currency, or could even kind of make people upset in other states. In the same way, you know, it's not really productive to talk about personal responsibility and personal accountability for a segment of the population that's been historically underrepresented in higher education and continues to be underserved. And so rather than kind of lean on the language of social justice or on responsibility, for us, there's a place where the language of community development and community empowerment and workforce development becomes appealing to everybody. Now, you know, that in itself is a political move. It's an attempt to claim the righteous middle ground. But in that way, it kind of focuses on the mission of community service and of serving the entire community, not just one part of it. And in our experience, that's a tactic that will both generate support and create momentum in a variety of stakeholders.
Great, thank you, Ed. Tricia, you answered this question in the Q&A box, but it may be worthwhile for everyone to hear your answer. There was a question about the accountability measures that are used at the Community College of Aurora. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And this is something that's new for us as we've really tried to crosswalk all of the really good work that's happening from the individual level through departments, and that's academic and co-curricular departments, with what we're trying to achieve institutionally. And so we've really been able to say, okay, you know, when we are sitting down and looking at what each department is trying to achieve, we are looking at programmatic outcomes at that point. You know, what were the outcomes that we were working toward? So in an academic setting, our retention numbers, our graduation numbers, specifically for that academic program, and then disaggregating them to determine where those gaps are. Based on this analysis and based on course evaluation feedback and student surveys, we then go in and say, okay, let's develop plans for that department that help us to reduce those gaps, to address the challenges. Those then are utilized, the department plans are utilized to develop individual goals. So the metrics that we are setting institutionally at the strategic planning level, we go through and say, okay, what departments can really impact this? Whose work is related to each of these particular strategies? What are the metrics that we're trying to see move? And then how do I, in my individual work, everyone across the college, how do I help that move up? The same thing goes with all of our support programs. And when I think about instructional intervention programs that we design, professional development programs for our faculty and instructors and staff, we're looking at, are we seeing return on investment, so to speak, in terms of student growth and elimination of that equity gap? And so we're really pulling it back to the data and using assessment, not just as that compliance component, but really about how effective are we being? And if that's not effective, then let's try a different strategy that will hopefully help us do what we're trying to do, which is start with the end in mind with our students.
Thank you, Tricia. Letitia, there's a question about the elimination of the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. Who's now responsible for those duties, the provost or someone else?
Okay, so I'll start a little bit with some context around that decision. And of course, I hope you would expect me to hear me say it was a strategic decision. In our strategic plan, we specifically had goals around enhancing our infrastructure, both physical and operational. And one of the things that drove even that decision is that, you know, with Winston-Salem State's focus on strengthening liberal education, it's critical that there is the deliberate marriage of our curricular and co-curricular activities, and that they be in alignment, and that the learning outcomes that we have as an institution are reflected in everything that happens for students and every experience for our students. So what we did as a campus community, because each of our strategic goals and objectives had subcommittees that worked on specific strategies. Well, what are ways we can operationalize or implement across the campus that would allow us to meet the objectives and meet the outcomes of the goals? And one of them was around organizationally, you know, how can we perhaps horizontally align instead of maybe a siloed alignment, to benefit our student experiences. So in 2015, we started having these conversations, and we talked with all the leadership across the various areas in student affairs and academic affairs, and we fully implement. We reported out to our board of trustees. We reported out to our campus constituents. You know, it was a very significant and engaging process, and we had our vice chancellor for student affairs left the university to pursue another opportunity at another school. And so we used that as the opportunity to say, well, now that we've been having these conversations, maybe this is that perfect time to reorganize structurally so that this position is integrated more deliberately in the academic mission of the university. And so now what we did is we rewrote the position description to be an associate provost, and that position now reports to the provost. And we are recruiting that position, and in the meantime, the directors in the specific areas in our structure, student affairs, they report to the provost until that associate provost is hired.
Thank you.
Sally,
Ed.
can I add just a quick piece about that, if you don't mind? Because because we went through so many changes, and the elimination of our provost and the elimination of our chief operating officer. And I think a couple of the things that we really learned was, we did the same thing. It was time to restructure and really look at what makes some more sense. But we even decided. Here's an example that we did. So we eliminated our chief operating officer, who supervised our facility services team. And so you think facility services, really big chunk. Who's going to take on that role? Does it fit in student services? Does it fit in academic affairs? You start to really look at what makes the most sense. But we even took it to a different level and said, all right, our director of auxiliary services, who, manages our housing and our meal plan and so on, has such a wonderful relationship with our facilities team because he works so closely with them that we said, well, does it make sense for us to put our facility services folks under our auxiliary services, have that, because that person still directly reports to me, the vice president for student services. And so we made him an executive, director of facilities and auxiliary services, and that director reported directly to him. So when you're going through all of these leadership changes, it's the perfect opportunity to really start looking at everything across campus and where does it fit best. Like Leticia was saying, there's conversations going on campus about we're moving in this direction. How do we make these things fit? For us, when we were going through these financial changes, we had to make some cuts. So it was the perfect opportunity to say, what makes the most sense on campus? And don't stop yourselves from thinking everything has to report to a higher level. Once again, I go back to, the highest paid people on our campus don't always make the most sense in, having someone to have to report to them. So for us, that made perfect sense to take one of those direct report areas, put him in a different area. That makes a lot of sense because he works with those custodians. He works with the facilities plants, the trades guys, in almost everything he does on a daily basis. So thinking from that different perspective makes a lot of sense. So I encourage everyone to, step out of the box and say everyone has to report to a VP or some sort of, take and eliminate that process and just start from the bottom and say, where does this make the most sense? We've learned that it makes a lot of sense to think outside the box, especially with, all that we've gone through over the last 3 or 4 years. So I hope that helps a little bit. Thanks. Just think outside of the box.
Yeah, Ken, thank you. Stacy, did we have some more questions?
Yes, Ed, this is for you. You had mentioned that on average your student outcomes looked great, but that when you looked at individual student segments, you found these significant gaps. Can you talk a little more about how information about those gaps was discovered and then shared with stakeholders? And also, could you talk about what kind of conversations that led to with faculty when they learned about these outcomes?
Sure, sure. Let me start with the piece about the data and disaggregation, because I think that's certainly a challenge. I think it's always it can be tempting to just look at the average student's experience, right? Everyone knows their iPads rate, everyone knows their FTE, everyone knows kind of, you know, how many students they graduate or transfer or so forth. It's a little more, it's a little bit more challenging if you're not, for instance, in a cabinet role or an IR role, to get access to the data about, hey, you know, what happens to all of our Hispanic students, or our Black students, or women versus men. It's a little bit harder to disaggregate that data if you can't find it on your IR website or on your Fast Facts. So I think there's certainly one of the things that we have to get used to doing in order to have the conversation about equity is ask the question about, well, do we have that data? If all we have is average data, we don't know, for example, you know, what all of our non-traditional students' experience is. What the experience is of our women versus our men, or our men versus our women, and so forth. So it helps if you come from a data-rich environment, but if you feel like that kind of information is closely guarded at your institution, then I think we have to have the courage to ask for it. And then the second part was about faculty, right? So in our at our college, the conversation about starting a permanent office on campus to support African American men was, I think the faculty were fine with that. After the president engaged the board board was fine with that. I wish I could say that we're having the experience that Tricia articulated for Aurora. I think actually the conversation about equality and equity is an ongoing conversation with our faculty. Maybe it's because we've done so much work on learning outcomes and on commonality of instruction across sections and that kind of thing. The notion of an inclusive pedagogy is still something we're trying to onboard and bring on board with our faculty. So quite honestly, it's an area where we have an opportunity. We continue to have work to do. People's values are in the right place. How those values translate into practice can sometimes be a challenge, and we have some kind of retail level groundwork to do in terms of working with faculty on the practice of a more inclusive pedagogy that's more self-conscious. It's more conscious about equity. So it's not that we can be colorblind or blind to ethnicity or blind to questions of gender. It's that we have to be more conscious of it and conscious of the ways in which we have historically excluded rather than included everyone who needs access to educational opportunity. Thanks for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. This next one is for Tricia, but I also think maybe the other panelists could also answer it. How has the student voice been invited and captured in your college's approach?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. This is a really important piece for us for a variety of reasons. I mean, obviously, the whole reason that we're all here is for our students. We've also received some great feedback from our accrediting body in terms of ensuring that we are being responsive to student needs and that it's not all faculty, staff, administratively driven. And so we've been really stepping back quite a bit. I talked a little bit about our Inclusive Excellence Strategic Plan. We have a cross-college committee that leads that, and a big piece of what they focus on is how do we get more information from students so that we are designing programming and responsive programming and support with our students, really focusing on that, how do we serve, and rejecting the concept of save and create programming that they want to see that will help them reach their goals. So some of the things that we've been doing, we have a climate assessment that we do with our students every 2 years to determine how they feel. Do they feel respected in their learning spaces? Do they feel that they are co-contributors of knowledge? Or do they feel that you know they come in as an empty vessel, which is what we are trying absolutely to move away from. We also just worked on redoing our institutional outcomes. Those hadn't been redone in about 20 years, and we realized we need to get voice from student on what is it that they are hoping to know and be able to do when they graduate, whether that's moving on for transfer or going into work. So held a series of focus groups to get an understanding from the student's perspective there. We actually, in our inclusive pedagogy this year, we will have student attendance at that so that we can create the dialogue between our faculty and our students as to, you know, what we're working to achieve. And then similarly, we are launching training for our students with regard to the equity work and inclusive excellence so that they can take these concepts into our community, into their work, moving away from here. And then finally, as we are going through some assessment work institutionally, we have students involved in every piece of that as well. The biggest thing is trying to not assume and ensure that we have the voice of students as we work through that.
I'd like to jump in too and talk about how we utilize our students too. One, you know, we have a student trustee. We've had one for years. It's part of our institutional student government, student body government part. So they sit on the board of trustees, provide feedback both to and from in respect to what students are doing, keeping our board in line to what students are doing or what their needs are. So that's a really big piece, having a student trustee. We have a student member on our faculty senate. So they are involved in those conversations around academics. Kind of a weird situation. I think people might say, really, you have a student member on your faculty senate? It's true. And what they're there for is to help offer that feedback. So that's another piece. Our student government has its own strategic plan that is aligned with the university's strategic plan. They present it at our board of trustees meetings. And then I guess the last thing too, our students, of course, our students are involved in you know, everything, just like Tricia was saying, but our students are also, you know, I sort of lost my train of thought. They're just involved in just about everything that we do on our campus and trying to make sure that we truly have that feedback from our students. So just a few other pieces that I think we use that you might consider in how you get your students involved across campus.
Would Ed or Letitia like to add to that?
This is Letitia. I want to say that we have, I think, created a culture on our campus where our students are engaged, extremely engaged. So in line with what Ken mentioned as well, you know, we do have student representation in key committees, but we also make sure that in our strategic processes, our strategic budgeting process, our resource allocation processes, there are student members at the table, and we seek their input, and we remind them that our mission is to provide them the experiences. And so I think this builds a level of trust and mutual respect for opinion, and helps students understand the process, the governance, how these things happen at an organizational and institutional level, and that it is quite complicated. And I think it makes our students better advocates for us, even in the midst of change, because they are knowledgeable and aware about what's going on, about how decisions are made. Even if they don't always like the decisions, I think it makes them more articulate in being able to speak to their peers on campus about what's going on, and most importantly, why. And the strategic plan keeps us true to that.
Had to throw in that last little piece, didn't you?
Of course, of course.
Of course, there you go. At Santa Fe, we are trying hard to listen to what our students' experience is. We're not in a state where we have students who serve on boards or in shared governance situations, but we have included students in the Resource and Planning Council, where as we make decisions about what is the educational plan that we want to carry out, what are the institutional benchmarks that we want to carry out, how are we going to allocate resources to carry out those plans. It's extremely enlightening to have students at the table who are able to, because when you have to explain things and you say, oh, that's why my professor does so-and-so, or sometimes the student will say, gee, I'd never heard of that, and that should tell you something right there. If your intention in an educational plan or a student services plan is to have a certain kind of impact, but students aren't even aware of what the intention of the institution has been, then that should be telling us all something. And again, I think that one of the mantras that I've been trying to promulgate here at Santa Fe is that it's the student's experience that really constitutes the reality of the college. It's the way that the student comes into contact with any office, any instruction, any service that the college provides. The college is not what the provost says it is. It's not what the faculty says it is. It's not what the president says it is. It's the culmination of the student's collective experience. And the more we understand that, the more we'll be in a position to serve all students. And again, to say, well, hey, if my experience of the college was not the same as yours, then those are the conversations we need to have.
Let me add one other piece here, too, if you don't mind, Sally. I know we're really close, but yeah, I wanted to just throw out one other suggestion to everyone who's out there listening that I've truly found. It's a different process, but what I have done over the last 10, 12 years is I have been the advisor to our student government here on campus. And if you want to get true feedback from your students, I recommend that you be a part of the student government and you advise them, or you attend those meetings and hear what they have to say, so that when, you know, the president or the board of trustees are saying, what do the students really want or need, that is a great avenue to go back to and ask for that feedback, or be able to tell them, this is what they're saying, this is what they hear, what they're hearing, this is what they know. So just a suggestion out there, if you've got the time or you've got the energy, be a part of the student government in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I'm leaving right after this webinar on a retreat with our student government, and I tell you, it is the place to find information about what they're thinking and what they need, no doubt, on your campus.
Ken, thank you. And I'm glad that we ended our discussion around campus leadership for equity, gap reduction, and student success on an issue around the students. It seems exceedingly appropriate. I want to thank you all for participating, certainly our panelists, but also those of you that tuned in externally. And this webinar will be archived on the Foundation for Student Success website, which may be on the next slide. I'm not absolutely sure. There we go. And our final webinar in this series will be in early October, and we'll be focusing on the tough conversations on campuses around what are the issues and the strategies for really engaging in hiring to promote equity. And that means we're going to have campuses that have collective bargained environments and those that do not. So I encourage you to check the website and sign up for that when as soon as it's up there, which should be within about a week. And thank you again. That's it.